Sometimes the darkness wins. That's what I've been sitting with today. Not because I want to, not because I believe it always has to be, but because this time it did. Just yesterday, I found out that a friend of mine, someone that I've known for over 30 years, died in a shootout with the police. His name was Richard, and this episode isn't a news report. It's not a commentary. It's not a reaction video. This is me trying to process what happened the only way that I know how. By telling stories. By being real. By trying to make some kind of sense of it. Not just for myself, but for anyone and everyone who's ever lost someone to the weight that they carried all alone. Richard was kind of wild. He was hilarious. He was a derelict devil. There was a reason that we nicknamed him Berzerko, but we'll get into that. But beneath the jokes and adventures, there was pain, a profound amount of deep pain. Today, I want to tell you about the friend I knew, the kid who made us laugh until we cried, the man who didn't get the help that he needed, and maybe, just maybe, through his story, someone else will get the chance to make a different choice, to have a different ending to their story. Before the darkness took over, before all the headlines, there was just Richard. And if you knew him back then, you knew the kind of guy who made every story just a little wilder. The kind of kid who could have you rolling with laughter 1 minute and scratching your head in thought the next. He was younger than the rest of us, kind of like the little brother who just kept showing up and tagging along no matter what. And man, back in the day, the guy was a little twerp. He was the definition of a twerp. The kind of kid who probably didn't actually pull pigtails, but he definitely gave off the pigtail pulling vibe, if you know what I mean. He was inquisitive, relentless, daring. If there was a cliff to jump off of, Richard had probably already done it. If there was a rule to break, he'd find the edge of it just to see what would happen if he did. Before cold plunging was the latest cool thing to do, he and I would challenge each other to find the coldest water we could, whether that was a pond, a creek, or literal glacier runoff, and see who could sit in it the longest. We all grew up in this tiny rural town, maybe 300-400 people. And so there weren't a lot of other kids around. It was just us. So your friends were kind of chosen for you. So even though he was a few years younger than us, he still tagged along. He still hung with us. He could keep up too. And there were moments, real moments, where we weren't just letting him tag along, but we were laughing right along with him. There's this one memory that still makes me smile. We were on a cross-country bus trip. Me, my twin brother, Richard, and a couple other guys were sitting in the back of the bus. We were young, immature, doing all the things. And we were packed into the back of this poorly converted city bus, doing mission work from Washington State to Washington, D.C. and back. But mostly, we were sitting in the back of the bus, cracking jokes until our sides hurt. I don't even remember what we were laughing about, and honestly, it really doesn't matter. But I just remember the feeling of gasping for air, trying to shut up, trying to keep it quiet because everyone in the front of the bus was telling us, shh, keep it down. And then exploding all over again because Richard made one more ridiculous comment. You know the kind of laughs that I'm talking about, the kind that make you feel like you're part of something real, like you never want to leave that moment. And that was Richard. But now let's get into the true story. The legendary story. The donut story. Let me set the scene. We were in the Beast. My brother and I's beat up 1976 Dodge Aspen. This thing was a rusted out lowrider with no shocks, barely road legal, and an 8-track player that we couldn't even use because who uses 8-tracks anymore? But we were the only guys in our little town who actually owned a car. So the Beast was our freedom. It was our ticket to adventure. If we were going to town, even if it was simply for a grocery run, word got around and guys piled in it like it was a party, like it was a clown car at a circus. One night, after playing church league softball and a couple hours of pickup basketball, we were packed 7 deep, just one more than we were legally allowed to actually have in the car because there weren't enough seatbelts, but we did it anyway. But before leaving town, we had one last ritual to complete. So we stopped at the local grocery store for 3 staples necessary for a good ride home. Caribbean Cooler Brisk Iced Tea, Nutty Bars, and a box of donuts. If you know, you know. So the smell in the car was this mix of sweat and sugar, and it made us have to roll down the windows just so that we could breathe as we sped along those backcountry roads. And we were all wired from too much sugar and too much teenage boy testosterone. In the middle of a debate, probably about something stupid, Richard leans in from the back seat and proclaims with his best Southern Baptist preacher imitation voice, "Now this is an area where I am strong in the Lord." We all stopped, turned and looked at him. My brother, who was driving, said some kind of smart comment back to him. I don't remember what it was, but it was just enough to poke at Richard's ego one more time. And so Richard, in one of the most legendary moments in our teenage lives, grabbed a Boston cream donut. And if you know what a Boston cream donut is, it's a chocolate frosting covered donut full of custard. And he reached up from the back seat and smeared it across my brother's face as we're driving 60 miles an hour down the road. Chocolate, custard, everywhere. My brother swerved. We almost crashed. They could have lost all of us that night. But then we laughed so hard we couldn't breathe. And I'll never forget it. Because in that moment, Richard was Richard. Richard wasn't lost. He was one of us. He belonged, and he was as alive as he ever would be. I could tell stories about Richard for hours, and so could a bunch of other people. There are just too many to actually count. The laughs, the stunts, the chaos, some of it we probably shouldn't admit on camera. So, Mom, parents, if you're out there, shh, turn it off right here. But that's the thing. Richard wasn't just one story. He was 1,000 little moments. Some hilarious, some heartbreaking, and some, sadly, we'll never get to fully understand this side of eternity. But somewhere along the line, the tone changed. Life got heavier. The sparkle in his eye dimmed just a little bit at a time. He moved away for a while. I think it was California. And we lost touch. But every once in a while, when I was up visiting my mom and he was up visiting his parents, we'd get to hang out. Same old Richard, making jokes, trying something crazy. But behind the laughter, there was something else. Pain. Unspoken, mostly. Unprocessed. Unhealed. He eventually moved back to that small town, and I'd see him outside his house, smoking weed, drinking a beer, playing his music a little too loud, just to let the whole world know that he was still there. When I had the opportunity, we'd sit out on his porch. Sometimes just the two of us. Sometimes my brother was there. Sometimes there were other people around too. But I didn't drink anymore, and I was never high, but I still sat with him, and we still talked. Because I knew what it was like to carry pain without an outlet. And I wasn't about to let him sit there in it alone. At least not when I could help it in any way possible. He'd talk a little. I'd talk a little. Sometimes it was surface level. Sometimes it was the donut story. Sometimes it was just old times. But other times, he'd open up. Just a crack. But even then, there was a wall that we could never quite break through. Like something inside of him was keeping score, reminding him of every mistake, every failure, every regret. And no matter how much we talked, no matter how much ground we covered, The darkness never fully lifted. So yesterday, at the time of this recording, it was yesterday that I got a text message from my mom that Richard was gone. He was shot in a standoff with the police in the same small town where we grew up, right across from the street, right across from the church that we attended when we were kids, right where he used to ride his bike as a kid, right where he learned how to drive, and right where his daughter stood watching the whole thing go down. I don't know every detail. I don't need to, and I probably never will. What I do know is that anytime you have bullets being exchanged between a man and law enforcement, something has already gone deeply, tragically, horribly wrong. But this isn't where I speculate. This isn't where I make a judgment. This is where I grieve. Because no matter what happened that night, I know that the pain that led up to it didn't start there. It had started years, if not decades earlier, in wounds that never healed, in questions that never got answered, in demons that were never dragged into the light. And now his daughter, his son, his family, his friends, and his community will carry that night with them forever. His family, which is still grieving from the suicide of his brother just over a year ago, now has another son to bury. And that is another tragedy. And that little town where we all grew up, it got a little quieter, a little sadder, a little less Berzerko, but a little more haunted by the silence that we all kept for way too long. There are so many stories that I and everyone around there could tell about Richard. Too many for just one episode. We may get some people on here. We may do a future episode just to tell Richard's stories. Some are reckless, some are sacred, and some I'll carry with me to my grave. But here's what I keep coming back to. Richard didn't have to go out like this. He wasn't evil. He wasn't worthless. He was hurting. Yes, he made some mistakes, but he was a man with a deep spirit, a wild heart, and a war going on inside of him that he never quite figured out how to fight. And yeah, he made plenty of mistakes, plenty of big mistakes. But behind every reckless decision was a question he never found the answer to. Am I okay? Do I matter? Is there a way out of this mess? The truth is, he didn't need to go it alone. But somewhere along the way, he stopped believing that help was even possible. And maybe, just maybe, you're there too. Or maybe someone you love is. There's still time. The pain you're carrying, you don't have to carry it by yourself, and you don't have to carry it forever. The secrets you're hiding, you don't have to keep them buried. And the lie that says you're too far gone, it's just that. It's a lie for you, and it was a lie for Richard, and it was a lie for me. Richard's story breaks my heart. Because I wish I could have done more. I wish that maybe I had picked up the phone one more time, sent him a message, maybe had one more conversation. I wish he had told me a little bit more about the pain and the things that he was going through. But I can't go back, and I don't know that I want to. Part of me wishes I could, but I can't. So instead, I'm telling you, don't wait until it's too late. Don't let your shame keep you silent. Don't let pride keep you isolated. Reach out. Start a conversation. Let someone in. Because sometimes the darkness wins. But not today. Not if you choose something different. So this one is for Richard. For the wild kid who once smeared a Boston cream donut across my brother's face yelling, "This is an area where I am strong in the Lord," and where we nearly crashed our car laughing, and we still talk about to this day. For the teenager who rode in the back of that busted up Dodge Aspen, drinking brisk iced tea, eating nutty bars, and laughing until his ribs hurt. For the man who carried more weight than he let on. For the one who made us laugh, made us shake our heads, made us cry, and made us think. For the one we called Berzerko. And somehow that name fit. You were chaos. You were kindness. You were complex. And you mattered. And you still do. And you always will. So if you're watching this and thinking of someone like Richard, don't brush it off. Call them. Text them. Show up at their house randomly. And if you're the one barely holding it together, reach out. Don't do this tomorrow. Don't do it someday. Do it today. Do it right now. Because the truth is, sometimes the darkness does win. But sometimes we get a chance to fight back. And that fight starts with one conversation, one friend, one step. Rest easy, Richard. We'll take it from here. So if this resonated with you, don't scroll past. Share it with someone who might need it. And let's keep the light going.
So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.